The waitress you insulted yesterday just cleaned out your Swiss bank account, Mr. Thorne. The analyst delivering the news leaned back slightly, terrified of the silent assessment coming from the man across the desk. Elias Thorne did not look at the screen displaying the catastrophic zero balance. He looked at the analyst's trembling hand resting on the mousepad. The silence stretched until the air felt brittle. "The money is irrelevant," Thorne finally stated, his voice flat, devoid of any expected rage. "The security breach cost me 48 hours of protection. You will find the individual who allowed this to happen. You will find her now." It was not a request. It was the immediate, cold consequence of crossing the invisible limit of his world. It wasn't the waitress, Chloe Davis, who triggered the chaos. It was her younger brother, Alex, working a contracted cleaning shift in the secure server room of Thorne Industries. Alex had been careless, clicking a compromised link during a mandated network scrub, creating the tiny, nearly undetectable backdoor used by a competitor. Chloe found Alex shaking in their small apartment, convinced his mistake would cost him prison time or worse. The next morning, Chloe stood in the sterile lobby of Thorne Tower, waiting to be summoned. She wasn't seeking forgiveness, she was offering restitution. When Elias Thorne's severe, efficient chief of staff, Lena, finally met her, the terms were laid out with brutal clarity. Thorne wasn't interested in recovering the money, which was a strategic loss for him. He was interested in eliminating future vulnerabilities. "Mr. Thorne requires absolute certainty that Alex will never be in a position to jeopardize his operations again," Lena stated, her voice metallic. "Your brother will lose his contract and be blacklisted from IT work across the eastern seaboard, unless—" Chloe braced herself. "Unless what?" "Unless you agree to a 3-year contractual obligation, unpaid debt servitude, essentially. You will live on the estate, serving as his personal assistant, general cleaner, and operational buffer. Your hours are his hours. Your communication is monitored. You leave when your term is complete or when Mr. Thorne decides you are redundant. In exchange, your brother's mistake is erased from the record, legally and professionally." Chloe stared at the marble floor, the silence of the high-end office pressing down on her. 3 years. Her life paused, confined. But Alex's panic, his fragile future, that was the weight that mattered. "I accept the terms," she said, her voice steady despite the nausea. She didn't ask about the work, the salary, or the conditions. She just signed the thick non-disclosure agreement and the liability waiver. She was trading her freedom for her brother's peace, a transaction completed in less than 5 minutes. Lena gave her a key card and a single instruction. "The estate is 60 miles north of the city. You start tonight. Do not be late." The gravity of the contract settled in only as she looked at her meager possessions packed into a single duffel bag later that afternoon. She was walking into a gilded cage, accepting the consequence of a transgression she hadn't committed. The Thorne estate was less a home and more a monolithic bunker carved into the dense Connecticut woodland. The drive ended at a security gate that retracted with a slow, grinding mechanism, admitting her into a world defined by granite, glass, and unrelenting silence. Inside, the sheer scale was paralyzing. Hallways stretched, illuminated only by recessed cold light. Every surface, steel, polished wood, stone, reflected the light back with perfect, untouchable precision. Nothing looked lived in, only preserved. A stern housekeeper named Mrs. Petroff met Chloe at the entrance, her expression suggesting deep annoyance at the intrusion. "The rules are simple, Miss Davis. No music, no personal calls, and never under any circumstance enter the North Wing after 10 p.m. You are to be invisible unless summoned. Mr. Thorne values silence above all else. Dinner is at 7. Punctuality is non-negotiable." She provided the information in clipped syllables, offering no warmth or explanation. Chloe was led to her small, meticulously clean room adjacent to the staff quarters. It felt less like a bedroom and more like a high-end holding cell. Elias Thorne himself appeared later that evening, descending a wide, curving staircase with the unnerving grace of a predator. He was taller than she remembered from the brief, humiliating encounter at the restaurant. His tailored clothes hid nothing of his powerful build, but it was his eyes that stopped her. Hard, calculating, and absolutely devoid of empathy. There was a faint, almost invisible scar tracing the left side of his jawline, a silent reminder that this man was marked, dangerous, and isolated. "You are here to ensure my world remains predictable, Miss Davis," Thorne stated, not looking at her, but at the empty fireplace. "Predictability requires obedience. Obedience means you will do exactly what is assigned, exactly when it is assigned. Deviations will result in the immediate revocation of our agreement, regardless of the consequences to your brother. Understood?" "Understood, Mr. Thorne," Chloe replied. She didn't meet his gaze, focusing instead on the practical reality of the situation. He wasn't overtly cruel, but functionally so. He treated people like inconvenient tools, necessary evils in maintaining his fortress. The air in the room was so heavy with control that breathing felt like a transgression. "Where are you watching this story from? Let me know in the comments." Chloe's duties soon expanded beyond the mundane. She was expected to manage the complex logistics of Thorne's life, scheduling, preparing specific documents, and ensuring his personal routine remained undisturbed. 2 weeks into her servitude, the first collision occurred, stemming from something absurdly small: a misplaced pen. Thorne required a specific fountain pen for signing legal documents, always placed precisely at the top right corner of his massive mahogany desk. Chloe, in her meticulous cleaning routine, had moved the pen a few inches too far to the left, aligning it with the edge of the blotter, a purely aesthetic adjustment. When Thorne returned from his morning meeting, his eyes landed on the desk. He didn't immediately notice the pen. He noticed the change. He stopped dead, radiating a cold intensity that seemed to drain the oxygen from the library. "What is this?" he asked, his voice low, controlled, and far more dangerous than if he had yelled. Chloe stepped forward, her heart pounding but her face neutral. "I apologize, Mr. Thorne. I moved the pen to align it with the..." He cut her off instantly. "You moved it. You introduced variability. My schedule, Miss Davis, is built on absolute stasis. If I can't trust the placement of an inanimate object in my primary workspace, how can I trust you with anything of consequence? This environment is calibrated. Your task is maintenance, not redecoration." He picked up the pen, threw it across the room where it clattered against the stone hearth, and returned his gaze to her. "I require predictability. Your inability to follow the simplest rules suggests carelessness, or worse, arrogance. Consider this your final warning. If you introduce chaos again, you are removed and the agreement is void." Chloe did not argue, did not explain her logic or apologize excessively. She simply nodded once. "It won't happen again, Mr. Thorne." She walked to the hearth, retrieved the expensive pen, and returned it to the precise, original location. She didn't look at him again, recognizing the depth of his internal barricade. The misplaced pen hadn't been an inconvenience. It had been an invasion. He wasn't lashing out to be cruel. He was protecting his fragile, controlled isolation. He was terrified of anyone getting close enough to alter his structure. Chloe understood. The Pharaoh wasn't malicious, but utterly incapable of handling the messy proximity of another human being. She had seen the edge of the cage, and it was sharp. The fortress of Thorne's control showed its first crack during a late-night work session. He had been locked in his study since breakfast, driven by a tight deadline. Chloe was finishing up sorting files in the adjacent archive when she heard a heavy, sickening thud. She moved instantly, bypassing the instinct to knock. Elias was slumped on the floor next to his desk, one arm clutching his chest, the other gripping the edge of the leather chair. His face was pale, glistening with sweat, and the scar on his jaw looked unnaturally white. It wasn't a heart attack, it was a severe, paralyzing migraine, a condition she later learned was a chronic issue triggered by stress and light. He was entirely focused on managing the internal pain, his defenses momentarily down. He saw her, but before he could issue an order to leave, she was already moving. She didn't hover or panic. She had seen similar crises before in the stressful environment of the restaurant industry. She walked to the bathroom, soaked 2 hand towels in ice-cold water, and returned. "Lights off," she ordered, her voice low and firm, flipping the wall switch before he could object. The room plunged into near darkness, illuminated only by the faint glow of the monitors. She knelt beside him, placing one cold towel carefully over his eyes, shielding them from the residual light. She placed the second towel, folded against the back of his neck. "Get out," he forced the word out, his teeth gritted. "In a minute," Chloe replied, ignoring the command. She retrieved the prescription bottle from the side table, a potent analgesic, and poured a glass of water. "Take these. Now." He hesitated, glaring at her through the damp towel, hating the invasion, the intimacy of the situation. He hated the fact that she was competent and present, but the pain was winning. He snatched the pills and the water, swallowing them quickly. Chloe waited 5 minutes, monitoring his shallow breathing until the tension in his shoulders eased fractionally. She stood up, gathered the discarded wet towels, and walked back to the archive room, closing the door softly. She offered no pity, asked no questions, and made no mention of the incident the next morning. Thorne spent the rest of the night hating the raw, burning fact that in his moment of absolute vulnerability, the person who stayed, who knew exactly what to do, was the woman he had imprisoned. The functional dependence, the simple fact that her hands had calmed his internal storm, was a poison to his fortified solitude. After the migraine incident, nothing was openly discussed, but everything changed. The estate's silence remained, yet it felt less like a tomb and more like a library. The subtle changes began with the coffee. Thorne had always taken his morning coffee in his study, delivered precisely at 6:30 a.m. by Mrs. Petrov. After Chloe started ensuring his workspace was set up an hour earlier, the delivery ritual shifted. Chloe began placing the porcelain cup, filled with the specific dark roast he favored, not on his desk, but on the small side table near the window. It was a marginal change, requiring him to walk 3 steps to retrieve it. He never acknowledged the new location. He simply started walking those 3 steps every morning. Then came the dinner ritual. Thorne typically ate alone in the cavernous dining room, an imposing figure at the end of a 20-foot table. Chloe, responsible for laying out documents for his evening review, found herself lingering in the library, waiting for his summons. One evening, finding her still there, he made a guttural sound that wasn't quite a command, but an acknowledgement. The next night, she noticed a second chair had been placed at the far end of the dining table, near the window, away from him, but undeniably present. Chloe never joined him at the table, adhering strictly to her staff position, but after setting his meal, she would sit in the library, completing her own work. Thorne began extending his dining time by exactly 15 minutes. He was delaying the moment when the house would fall silent again, waiting for the ambient low sound of her turning pages or the quiet click of her keyboard. She didn't try to soften him. She never asked about his day, never spoke unless directly addressed, and maintained the professional distance required by their contract. She introduced small, practical elements of life. a bowl of fresh fruit on the counter, a single small cactus plant on the windowsill in the study, elements that didn't demand attention, but subtly opposed the sterile atmosphere. Thorne adjusted. He found himself expecting the scent of the evening's herbal tea wafting from the kitchen as he worked. He found himself adjusting his schedule to ensure she was present when he required a document fetched. He wasn't relying on her for affection or conversation. He was relying on the certainty of her presence. Chloe was proving to be the one fixed, predictable point in his highly volatile world. The cage was still there, but someone was quietly tending the garden outside the bars. The equilibrium fractured over a security issue. A highly sensitive file detailing a corporate acquisition was accessed from an external IP address. The estate immediately went into lockdown. Thorne was furious, the veneer of controlled observation stripped away, revealing the raw paranoia beneath. He bypassed the security team and went straight to the nearest target, Chloe. She was in the kitchen preparing his late-night protein shake. He slammed his hand on the marble counter, making the blender jump. "It's a low-level backdoor access, Chloe. An amateur leak, just like the last time. You are the only link." Chloe looked up, meeting the accusation in his icy gaze. "I didn't access any files, Mr. Thorne. I haven't even touched a terminal in 36 hours. Lies are a predictable tactic of betrayal," he spat. "You have the motive, your resentment of this arrangement. You have the means, unrestricted access to the physical plant. Do you think I'm blind to the pity in your eyes? Did you think I wouldn't see you exploiting the quiet moments to feed information to the outside? Was this the price for keeping your brother out of trouble?" The accusation wasn't just unjust. It was a total denial of the constancy she had offered. It wasn't about the file, it was about the fear of the subtle connection they had built. He was preemptively tearing down the bridge before she could walk across it. "I have been here for 9 months, Mr. Thorne," Chloe said, her voice shaking slightly, not from fear, but from exhausted resignation. "I have followed every rule, managed every logistical nightmare, and never once questioned the unfairness of this contract. I have protected your privacy, your health, and your precious predictability. And this is your conclusion, that the moment I show competence, I must be betraying you?" "Competence is the most efficient cloak for malice," Thorne retorted, his jaw tight. "I know this game. I have played it my entire life. I don't need evidence. I need certainty. You are compromised." Chloe dropped the metal scoop she held. It hit the floor with a loud clang, a violent sound in the sterile silence. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the raw, terrifying isolation he willingly enforced. He was afraid not of betrayal, but of letting himself rely on her, even marginally. She understood she could not stay in a place where trust was impossible, where every gesture of care was filed under potential threat. The contract is nullified immediately," Chloe stated, her voice regaining its strength. "You can call Lena, blacklist my brother, and prosecute him for the initial infraction. I cannot exist in an environment where the price of staying is the assumption of guilt." She turned and walked out of the kitchen. Thorne did not stop her. He watched her go, a cold, heavy sensation settling deep in his chest. He stood perfectly still, listening to the hurried sounds of her packing her single duffel bag. The door to her room closed, then reopened seconds later. Her footsteps echoed down the grand hall, leading towards the gate. When the electric grinding of the main gate announced her final departure, the silence that followed was absolute, suffocating. The castle had closed again, and this time the isolation was deeper, carrying the taste of self-inflicted defeat. He had succeeded in pushing her away, confirming his belief that everyone eventually leaves. The first morning without Chloe, Thorne didn't get his coffee until 7:15 a.m., delivered by a thoroughly exasperated Mrs. Petrov. It was lukewarm, too milky, and placed directly on the mahogany desk, interrupting the precise angle of his paperwork. He didn't drink it. He dumped the entire cup into the waste bin, the sound loud and pathetic in the deserted study. The predictability he craved vanished instantly. His meticulously organized schedule felt arbitrary. His lunch, usually delivered exactly at 1:00 p.m., was late, and when it arrived, the staff had forgotten his required supplement mix. He couldn't focus. He found himself wandering the silent estate, his footsteps echoing on the stone floors. The house, which he had once found reassuringly empty, now seemed vast and hostile, swallowing all sound and light. The library felt suffocating. He went to retrieve the specific pen for a signature and, without thinking, reached for the spot 3 inches to the left of the blotter, the spot Chloe had once moved it to. The pen wasn't there. He stared at the empty space, the muscle in his jaw twitching. He had adjusted to her adjustment, a subtle, unconscious dependence he had aggressively denied. That night the migraine hit again, worse than before. He was alone in his study, the darkness offering no relief. He crawled to the side table, fumbling for the pill bottle. His hand knocked the glass of water over, soaking the rug and scattering the pills across the dark floor. The pain was blinding, but the physical struggle to find the small white tablets was the real humiliation. He realized with a wave of despair that had nothing to do with pain that he didn't even know where the fresh towels were kept. He lay there, paralyzed, not by the headache, but by the shattering realization that his functional survival had been outsourced to the very person he had accused and driven away. He hadn't been abandoned. He had deliberately amputated the one steady support he had allowed himself to build. The isolation was no longer a shield. It was a self-constructed cage, and the walls were closing in, demanding accountability for his own cruelty. His empire was intact, but inside the castle, the ruler was failing. Elias Thorne spent the next 48 hours not seeking Chloe, but systematically dismantling the false accusation he had thrown at her. He didn't use his chief of staff. He handled the investigation himself, demanding high-level security audits. The breach had been real, but the source was a deeply buried internal hack, orchestrated by the competitor she was initially accused of helping. Chloe was, predictably, clean. Thorne didn't call her. He knew an apology was useless and would be immediately rejected. His focus shifted to the contract and its consequences. He realized that voiding the agreement, as he had threatened, meant the initial mistake made by Alex Davis would surface, destroying the young man's future. He contacted Lena with specific instructions, delivered with the cold authority that masked his true intent. The non-disclosure agreement remains in place. The debt is retired. Furthermore, I want Alex Davis enrolled in the best cybersecurity program we can find, fully funded. It must appear to be a completely anonymous, merit-based scholarship. If the recipient or his sister ever trace the funds back to Thorne Industries, you will be personally responsible. This was not benevolence. This was practical penance. He was using his power not to control, but to restore her life, recognizing that her freedom was tied to her brother's safety. But the protection didn't end there. He knew Chloe had left the estate with minimal savings and a black mark against her resume. He anonymously acquired the small, struggling restaurant where she had once worked as a waitress. He had the premises completely refurbished, ensuring the lease was secure for the next decade. He then transferred ownership to a blind trust set up in Chloe Davis's name, complete with a substantial operational reserve. The documentation was meticulously filtered to suggest a complex, decades-old inheritance from a distant, unknown relative. He sat in his study, reviewing the final complex trust documents. He had just signed away several $1 million and utilized countless hours of corporate resources, all for a woman who despised him and who he might never see again. He felt nothing resembling romantic love, only a heavy, defining sense of rightness. He had taken her world and forced her to rebuild his. Now he had to ensure her world was more secure than before. He was acting without control, without expectation of return. It was the purest form of sacrifice a man like him could make, using his isolation and power to protect, not to possess. He had corrected the injustice, yet the price for him was continuing to endure the isolation he deserved. 6 months later, Chloe was standing in the busy, warm kitchen of her new restaurant, The Hearth. The building was familiar, but everything inside was modern, efficient, and hers. The inheritance had been a bewildering, life-altering event that she still couldn't entirely process, but she worked, transforming the space into a place of warmth and community. Elias Thorne appeared on a Tuesday afternoon, the restaurant nearly empty between the lunch and dinner rush. He didn't use the front entrance. He stood in the doorway of the kitchen, looking out of place in his tailored suit against the stainless steel and steam. He was still the imposing, severe man, the faint scar on his jaw still visible. "Mr. Thorne," Chloe said, wiping her hands on her apron. No shock, no hostility, just a flat acknowledgement. He didn't offer an explanation for his presence or an apology for the past. He simply looked around the organized chaos of the working kitchen. "The ventilation is suboptimal," he stated, his voice low. "It's an old building," Chloe countered, not bothering to argue. "I can have the plans redrawn. Better flow. Less strain on the equipment," he offered. It wasn't a question, it was functional care. "I don't need your money, Mr. Thorne, or your control," she reminded him quietly. He looked directly at her then, the intensity momentarily blinding. "I have no interest in control. I only have an interest in efficiency, and in being present where things are functioning." He paused, his gaze dropping slightly to the floor. "I require order, Miss Davis. You are the only person who introduced order without demanding anything in return." Chloe considered this. He hadn't changed into a soft, romantic hero. He was still rigid, still marked by his isolation, still demanding predictability. But he wasn't demanding it from her. He was acknowledging that she was the source of it. "This is my space now, Mr. Thorne. The rules here are mine," Chloe said. "Understood," he replied immediately. He stepped further into the kitchen, moving with careful deliberation, respecting the physical boundary she maintained. He reached out and picked up a clean spoon, inspecting it under the harsh kitchen light. He put it back down, exactly where he found it. "I'll be sitting at the counter," he announced. "If you require logistical planning, I will charge you standard consulting fees." Chloe watched him retreat to the counter. He sat down, pulled out a stark black notebook and opened it, signaling that he was ready to wait. She turned back to the simmering sauce on the stove, a small, involuntary smile touching her lips. The castle was still 60 miles away, but the isolation was broken. He came back the next day, and the day after that. He became the silent, consistent fixture at the corner counter, observing, advising on supply chain efficiency, sometimes just watching the steam rise from the grill. He didn't invade, he remained. The relationship wasn't built on grand declarations or ideal love, but on shared, practical existence. A family, Chloe realized, wasn't about blood or promises. It was about choosing to stay quietly every day in a place that no longer felt like a cage, but simply home. If this story moved you, please like the video, comment with your thoughts on Elias's transformation, and subscribe for more emotional cinematic narratives.